being bold is very much a big part of how we engage, because you have to stand out and get noticed. Creating contrast with what is the expectation is how you initially get that attention.
Welcome to Be Bold Branding, where we discuss the power of differentiating yourself through your own unique story and standout personal brand.
One of the most challenging parts of being a speaker or presenter is being engaging or entertaining. And let's face it, very few truly are. So when we heard about our next guest and his team of certified infotainers, well, we had to have him on this podcast. Anders Boulanger is a speaker, author, magician, and founder and CEO of Engagify. For nearly 2 decades, he's been training teams and individuals how to engage in order to rehumanize business.
Anders, welcome to Be Bold Branding.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, we like to get right into this. You talk about authentic interactions, which we love. What's your opinion of that? Like, how does authenticity play a role in engagement?
Well, that's a great question. And our website is Engagify.ai, and everyone thinks it's for artificial intelligence. But I said, no, that's for authentic interactions. That's my little spin on it. How that works with engagement, and from some of the coachings and trainings we've done with teams, we work with a lot of technology companies. And one of the things where people are trying to convey information, it's kind of like they feel like the words are the only thing that matter, right? Like I say the right things and it doesn't, and that's all. Like I communicated, boom, I'm done, right? And when we start kind of coaching them, how you deliver that is as important and more important than the actual information, so that people remember, people accept what it is that you're saying. Maybe you have emotionally affect them to maybe take action, right, in terms of business. And one of the things we've discovered is that the more people stop trying to be something they're not and kind of embrace who they are, they actually become far more interesting to watch and engage with. So that's where I think that authentic interactions really comes in, is that when you have real moments with real people, it is far more emotional, far more memorable. And I think business and relationships and connections then come out of that.
Yeah, we actually couldn't agree with you more. You know, being personal branders, that's sort of the crutch of everything that we build on. And, you know, people don't do business with a logo, and those authentic engagements is really where business is turned. You know, I'm in the real estate business. I tell my agents all the time, you can sign as many contracts as you want, but contracts are usually only as good as the people that sign them. If you don't have the relationship, it's probably not going to help you.
So true. So true. So what's got you started as a magician? That's
fascinating.
Sure. Yeah. So my background, I was 5 years old. I got a Fisher-Price magic set for Christmas, and I just loved that thing. Like learning, you know, you're a little kid, you just want to be like, you know, the magician with the top hat and tails and cape and everything. I did magic at kindergarten at show and tell. I did, you know, stuff at show and tell throughout, you know, elementary school. Because it was such a hit, my parents and grandparents kept giving me magic books, magic tricks, magic sets for Christmas and birthday. And then when I was about 12 years old, I started doing birthday parties just in my little town of 500 people. And in that little town, you know, it was basically all the same kids of the same age would all go to each other's birthdays. So I found out pretty quickly I had to change my show up because they were catching on to me. You know, it was the same kids all the time. And then I paid my way through university, doing kind of fairs, festivals, starting doing corporate events. And then I got trained by a trade show magician or infotainer named Joel Bauer. And he's kind of like the legend in the industry, and basically showed me how to do it. And, you know, I kind of embraced that style and was able to get busy enough that I needed more people to help me. So we used, you know, we got our other infotainers, our certified infotainers that work with us. And so what we do, and just to kind of give you a sense of what the heck's an infotainer, because it's kind of a made up word, is that we take a company's information and combine it with a unique form of entertainment, usually a combination of magic, mentalism, mathematics, martial arts, interesting and intrinsically interesting demonstrations that we can then attach a company's benefits or, you know, USP or their secret sauce, whatever their differentiators are. and that we create a presentation that people want to be a part of, they want to watch, but the entertainment is the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down, right? So that's where we combine that. And so working trade shows is really when I started codifying engagement, because you're in one of the most highest distraction environments known that I've ever worked in, right? Like, just to give you an example, I've been next to a booth that had like an American Ninja Warrior course in it, a bicycle-powered Ferris wheel, a skateboard half pipe. I've had, celebrities like Tony Hawk beside me in a booth, and then behind me was the mountain from the Game of Thrones, and Klay Thompson was playing basketball, a few further booths back in a basketball court built into a trade show booth. So a lot going on, right? And so how do you capture people's attention, hold their attention long enough for you to do what it is you need to do, right? And so I was always becoming I still am, and in a sense, a human split test, like A/B test, right? I'm always watching, because entertainers are lucky because they have immediate feedback, basically, right? Is what I'm doing working or not? And if it's working, the applause, the smiles, the laughter, whatever it is, they're just having a crowd at a trade show booth, because you always start with nobody and you got to stop a crowd. It's a little bit like corporate street performing. Whenever that feedback happens, that's like the pat on the back, right? That you're doing it right. And when you're not doing it right, pretty quickly.
Get right.
Right. And so you're always trying to change what it is you're doing to try to pick it up. So, the Be Bold branding podcast, being bold is very much a big part of how we engage, because you have to stand out and get noticed, right? So creating contrast with what is the expectation is how you initially get that attention.
I love that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just had to interject here because this reminds me so much of how I learned personal branding through the years. And basically, I learned a lot of that through bad commercials, right? Really bad commercials. Because if you sit and you look at the Super Bowl commercial and you realize those people are paying millions per 30 seconds, right? And you think, oh, that commercial was so cute. That puppy was amazing. I love that. That was so sweet when he jumped up and ate whatever, right? But what business was it for? And what is unique about that business that causes me to remember and seek further information and potentially do business with that business? That's what's missing in the world. And when you say we really look at this, it's more purposeful, right? It's this purposeful infotainment. It's delivering information in an entertaining way. And when you don't do that, I saw millions and millions of dollars wasted, and still see it today. In fact, today, I would tell you, I thought it couldn't get any worse when I entered the media world back in the late 80s. Today, it's even worse.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's all about creativity, but nobody is about the substance.
Yes. Well, and it's contrast, and being bold, captures that attention, but it's the relevance that's going
to hold it.
And it's so funny you mentioned Super Bowl commercials, because I was having lunch just before I got on here, and I was downstairs in my studio here, and I was watching the top 10 Super Bowl commercials. So as you were saying them, I was kind of cycling through trying to remember, what was the product or the company that was associated with the different celebrities. And you're so right that you can go, and the further you go and the wilder you are, and it has no relevance or point, the more transparent and kind of like shameless grab at attention it is, right? It almost can kind of come back on you. And it reminds me, one time I was at a trade show where they had, those green screen suits, or their blue suits.
Yes.
Yeah. They'd like totally over the face, and they sometimes wear them to, different sporting events and things. There was about 4 people dressed up in these body suits, and this techno music would come on, and they started like dancing like robots all over the place. And so walking through a trade show, you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And I often say this is the, what the hell is this test, right? Like that grab someone's attention. Like, but unless you answer that question of relevance pretty quickly, you just kind of go, okay, like, and so they just danced, and you kind of watched like, okay, what's going to happen next? And then they were just done.
Yeah. And nothing happened.
And like, okay, what was that? What was up with that? Like, you don't want people saying that. What was up with that? Right. You capture that attention, show them the relevance, and then start reeling them in and taking them on a journey, taking them on a story so that they want to take those first few steps of the customer buying journey, like, go deeper and have a deeper, richer, in case of trade shows, booth experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where, everything has to be choreographed and everything has to be thought out in terms of that kind of play or that kind of engagement strategy.
Yeah. I do like it though. It makes a lot of sense because the conventions they're just like
There's a lot of noise.
mind blowing, and you sometimes you can't even get to all the booths, and then you can't remember the booths, and you can't remember the guys you talked to, and there was this one person, and then I remember, and then you got this sack full of all these tchotchkes, and you don't really know what they go with. But so I assume that like your brand is that Engagify, and then you're doing like a sleight of hand trick or something. You got some bit of a crowd, but now that's going to peel back to the very person who has the booth and why they want you at that booth.
Exactly right. So it's kind of, what I often do is I'll start my presentations with $2,000 that I'm going to give someone a chance to win. So I can gamify my presentation. So I throw down $2,000 on the floor. People are like, what the heck's going on here? Right. There's that test. Right.
Right.
And then they start gathering around, and then I'm doing magic just for entertainment purposes. So at first there's no real, tie-in because I'm still winning them over. Right.
Mm.
And I always talk about, I build rapport on the floor, and
I love it.
And then I get up on stage, I get on page, meaning this is when I bring in the messaging component, the script that we've created for this company. And so when I'll actually ask them permission, like, I'm going to start going. You guys ready? Like, buckle up, let's go. And then they say, yeah. And so then the messaging comes in. And so I'm taking them always from point A to point B in terms of, here's their problem state, what they might be experiencing. How many people know what I'm talking about here? And then they're like, yeah. They're nodding their heads and they're into it. And then I'll introduce the company's solution. And in the magic trick that I'm doing is kind of this aha moment of what just happened. And I'm talking about the company, and then we get a new result. So it's always kind of like every effect, every demonstration that we do is a transformation mechanism, is a way of getting people to think about things in a different way. And that's why I say I've done examples that are martial arts demonstrations, or I do a thing with a rubber band, and I'll shoot a rubber band about 15 feet away from me, and it actually hits the ground and comes back to me. And just like, and it's this physics demonstration, but it's about defying expectations. It's about knowing how to do something and having the right tools to do it. And so I'm always tying in company benefits or whatever their story is. And over many years, we've just kind of collected so many different ways of doing things that we're always able to help a company out and really underline and highlight what it is that they're trying to accomplish.
I love it. Yeah.
I tell you a company that needs you.
Okay.
Domino's Pizza.
Oh,
They need you badly. They have a entirely different strategy every time they play a new commercial. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Very, very few things are actually about the pizza.
Yeah.
One of their commercials was about potholes, how Domino's had given back to the community to patch potholes. And the most recent one they have out, I think right now, is something about tech, how they have some sort of tech-savvy app that follows your driver to their house or something like that, right? So it's all about tech. You wouldn't know this was a pizza company.
No,
Yes, that's for sure.
That's
That's insane.
So
Domino's is in a good place where if you said name a pizza company, that might be the first one people say. So they might be in a kind of a special category too, in that sense.
yeah,
Well, maybe.
maybe.
But they do have quite a few competitors these days. It's very interesting. That's what we watch, these commercials and YouTube videos and so forth, and about people trying to really get their strategy across and nail their brand. And it's just amazing how much money is wasted. So something like what you do is highly valuable, which brings me to another question. I think you mentioned you grew up acting, right? Or you did some acting.
I have a theater background as well. Yeah.
Okay. I have a minor in theater. I decided it wasn't for me, so I'm not going to call myself a thespian, but I have a minor, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it a whole lot, but it caused me to learn that I really wasn't born to do that, right? Which begs the question, are engaging people born or are they made?
It's interesting because I like that discussion. I've had it with some other people, actually. I think there's probably some things that do help you that are kind of you're predisposed. I've always been a bit of a talker, so that's kind of, a bit of a help. But when I go back to that thing that I talked about, the entertainers getting feedback, that's where I believe they're a creature of their environment, right? That you've discovered what works and what doesn't. And feedback is that big piece to it. And the problem is that some people don't get chances to have feedback. And I think about, my wife in her job, she would talk about, you get a yearly review, right? That's
Right.
all the only really feedback you get in that office job that she had, and yet every time I go out, I mean, even as we're talking right now, I can see you nodding, smiling, that idea that there is feedback happening. I'm like, okay, that's, seems to be going all right. That's been the big problem with virtual, is that there's such a lack of feedback that people are even more unsure of how they're doing, right? And so train a lot of sales teams on presentation techniques, on virtual engagement, vocal engagement. And one of the things we do is we give them the ability to get that feedback back from their peers, back from watching video of themselves. And so I just think that feedback part is that missing piece for people to be able to become more engaging. So maybe you are predisposed with certain skills, but I definitely believe it's a skill, and we can all learn and build a skill like we can with muscles.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
I do too.
Yeah, 100%. And in so many businesses, it is hard. That instant engagement, like you're talking about, is easier because you can read right now, do I need to make adjustments? And in the personal branding space, like we teach people the importance of building your brand first and being sure that it is out there constantly and consistently. Because
too, right?
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
love that, because you don't necessarily have interactions that you can play off of immediately. You have long terms that then you can go back to and say, hey, what made you choose me over every other realtor or every other podcaster, every other speaker or whatever? Well, we like this about your presentation or this, and then you end up getting that feedback that you don't get on a immediate, which you have the benefit of doing in those tight spaces like that. I'm always impressed with you guys, especially your magic tricks. Sleight of hand and up close and people surrounded, your people all around you, front, back, side. You got to keep all that. I've always been super fascinated by it. What would you say would be the number one thing like capturing someone's attention?
Well, definitely, there's two neurotransmitters that are associated with attention. And it really goes back to our evolution, right, of being cavemen and everything. And it's dopamine and norepinephrine. And dopamine is the reward. You hear that a lot these days, right? People see something they want, or they're shopping, or they're, any sort of reward, or by gamification, if they can win a prize. And we see that at trade shows a lot too, right? Anytime you can win something, it's spiking that dopamine, making people feel good, and it's something that we want. And then the norepinephrine is the neurotransmitter associated with stress and survival and like trying to get away from something we don't want, right? So those two neurotransmitters, and obviously dopamine is a lot easier to be able to manipulate and do because we're not threatening people, right? But there are subtler ways you can use that. But that's basically how we're going to capture attention. Is it something people really want? And of course, I start my trade show presentations off with a fan of $2,000. That, captures attention. I do things that have some perceived danger to them. That is also a bit of a story loop kind of idea too. They want to see the ending. They see the starting and they need closure on what's going to happen, right? So that's a part of that as well. But you can also look, I don't know if you guys heard of Bo Eason. He's a speaker trainer, and he's a former NFL safety for Houston and then for San Francisco 49ers. And he studied with a movement coach, and this movement coach went to Africa, and he watched a tribe of people who live amongst the lions. And one of the things they do is the people, they hardly ever get taken by the lions. They walk like they're predators. And so Bo Eason in his workshops and stuff teaches people to be more dangerous, to walk like a predator. And there is something about it, and you watch him move and you're like, damn, you don't want to take your eyes off of him because you're afraid he's going to might attack you, right? Like that's that kind of sense. And it's a real unconscious thing, right? I'm not saying we're consciously scared, but there is something kind of interesting about that. So that's where there are some moments of being dangerous or being unpredictable that people do want to pay attention because they're not sure what's going to happen next. Now, of course, that has to be handled in a thoughtful way so that we don't, break rapport and we don't push people away. But there are some things. So that's kind of the two things that you can do. It's kind of a push and a pull in a sense. That's what captures attention.
Yeah. Give us an example of danger, when you're capturing somebody's attention.
Well, in like I said, just the movement was one piece. Sometimes my mentor, Joe Bauer, he used to do something where he would just kind of put people on edge a little bit. So he would get people raising their hands. And I do this a lot in trade shows as well. Like, how many people want to win the $2,000? Raise your hand. How many people want to, how many people like to take a closer look, right? And people are raising their hands. He would do that when he was training us, but he would do something where he'd be like, raise your hand if, and we're already almost raising your hands, you want your money back. And it's just like, you're like, no, this is good. We're getting value. But we kind of caught ourselves. And it's that kind of push and pull, which, or he would say something. And again, I'm a Canadian. I'm almost too much of a nice guy to tell you how to scare people, right? But he would do things that he would make some sort of statement that flies in the face of convention, right? And you're like, who the heck are you to say that, right? He says, here's an example. He would say something like, Einstein said the same mind that created the problem cannot solve the problem. Well, he didn't know what he was talking about. When Einstein, and then you're like, what? You're going to call out Einstein? And then he would correct himself and just reframe it, and that what Einstein meant was blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And so but any of that time where you're polarizing a crowd a little bit. People who just love that, they will love you more, right? And sometimes those people you push away, you might not get back. So there is a little bit of a gamble in that sense.
In that.
Polarization,
I've noticed, I've noticed some big guys. Tony Robbins is a master at that. Like, he's a master at like spouting off something at you that you like. Everybody else is sort of shocked, like, oh my God, they're going to be pissed,
right?
And then he bends it around to the point that helps them, but he gets the shock value of it right off the bat, And I remember one time it was one that I was even shocked. I was like, and some girl was putting down her dad or something like that. And he's like, you need to call that dude up and tell him thank you for being such an asshole. And you're like, you didn't expect him to say it. And you're like, wow.
Yeah. This really reminds me of the law of thirds in marketing. And do you remember the Chevy Aztec? Was it by Chevy? Remember that Aztec? It's like, it was, some people thought it was the ugliest. Some people thought it was the greatest.
Oh, yeah.
And it had
that. Buddy of mine said the guy that designed it was a spy for Pontiac or something.
Oh, really? Okay.
He's like, nobody wants to design that thing.
So the law of thirds, and this ties into being bold so nicely, is that when they manufacture a car, they use that law because a third of the people are going to not even notice the car. A third of the people are going to love it, and a third of the people are going to hate it. But if you make something that all the people they won't love it because it'll be so bland that no one will really notice it. Right. Yeah. So
they'll remember it.
Right. So you kind of have to, in your authenticity, go for it, be who you are, and forget everyone who doesn't get you. Right. And because you're going to have so many more people who get you at such a deeper level that they want to embrace you.
Yeah, love that point, Anders. Love that point, because we talk about it all the time. And when you're building a personal brand, you will attract your people. If your message is authentic, if it is dialed in and correct, if you live up to the promises that you make, that you'll find your people in that. We're not going to be attractive to everybody. That's just the way it is. And that's okay, because there's 8 billion of us and plenty to go around. So,
yeah, it makes a big difference when things are bold. Right. And it's about just getting that message out there, grabbing that attention right away, and then reeling them in where you want to reel them in. You capture them where they are and take them where you want them to go.
And that leads me to a question here. So tell us, what about the engagement gap? What is that, and how do we overcome that?
For sure. So engagement gap was kind of a bit of a model that, I came up with during the pandemic, because what was happening was that, on that left side are what I call, customer facing teams, right? And it could be, if it was an internal team, it might just be, different departments of a company, right? And if we talked about internal communication, but the idea that most of those people maybe have never been taught how to be engaging, right? Which is pretty kind of not a class we take in school, right? So they're unaware, they're untrained. Some of them are unremarkable in some cases, okay? And then on the flip side, so the right side of this gap, if you have this big chasm and then you got the cliff on the other side, that's your customers or your internal customers, if you want, right? So it's the idea that we're trying to communicate to them. And that the problem with them is that they are busy, they're distracted, and they have no time. And we discovered this during the pandemic with virtual, is that people might be in a meeting and yet they're got 2 other monitors going and they're multitasking and off-tasking and could be shopping from Amazon and you're trying to sell to them and, all those kinds of things happening, right? And you don't even know because you're not in the same room with them, right?
Right.
And so when we're in person, we do have that advantage, but there is still distractions, people's phones, all these things happening. So when you learn engagement strategies, you're basically trying to hack that person's attention. Just, not unlike how you got Facebook and Instagram and all the distractions on your phone, they're hacking your attention too.
Sure.
Right? And, so we need to kind of up our game so that we're able to close that gap and then be able to communicate, be able to connect, be able to, capture that attention and deepen connection. So that's what I mean by engagement gap.
Yeah. I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah. So tell us, what one piece of advice would you give people about personal branding?
Personal branding. You know what? I'll kind of combine what you do and what I do a little bit and trying to smush them together here a little bit because, there is who you are when you leave the room, right? Like what people say about you when you leave the room. There's that kind of piece to that. And you can brand around who you are, which I think that's what you help people do and find what is that authentic piece and message they're trying to say. But I think people need to remember just to also what I'm saying is be that person and really own it, right? And have that kind of, authority when you communicate, have that ownership over the material that you talk about. There was something we were talking about earlier where, if you try to say so many things, you're not really saying anything. Right. And I can't remember if it was Zig Ziglar or who said it, but, most people are wandering generalities instead of meaningful specifics.
Yeah.
You say it too, right? And so that idea that if we can be a little more congruent with who we are, right? And instead of being wishy-washy, right?
Yeah.
I think that people give something people to latch onto, right? To something juicy, right? And I think if you are that person coming in, not only is it easier to personally brand yourself, but I think you're just going to be a lot more engaging at the same time to interact with.
I definitely agree with that 100%. And it does sort of go against our natural thought process, especially if we're salespeople, right? Because if you toe a line, if you stay specific in your sales, then you think, well, I might have been able to sell this guy, these widgets and that guy, that widgets, and I make money on all the widgets and whatnot. And really that doesn't work. Like what works is to say, hey, I've identified my ideal customer. I'm talking to my ideal customer. I'm branded and marketing to my ideal customer. And now I'm overwhelmed with ideal customers. But for some reason, that's so hard for people to grasp a hold of and live it until they do. And then when they do, they're like, oh my God, I wish I'd done this years ago, because I was guilty of that, for till Tanya came along. I'd do business with anybody. If I thought that I could make $1 off of them, I was going to do it. And she was like, look, you made some money, but you're working yourself to death. You're not getting to your ideal customer and stuff. Once I changed all of that, then not only did it change, now I can track where it comes from. So it's definitely, I love that quote. That's a good one.
Yes. Your topic today, I'm just totally intrigued by because of my experience in the theater world, however brief it was. And I always said sales is just theater. And, it truly is. It's like, okay, how can I express how I can help this person, right? How I can help this person, why I'm the one that should be able to help this person, and exactly how I'm going to get that done. And that really is, it's sales, right? And it's having a conversation, but it really is theater.
Yeah.
In the end of the day.
What we say is that engagement skills are the master skill of selling. Because if people aren't listening or paying attention to you, you really are dead in the water.
Yeah,
So
you can't get to them.
Yeah, there's no credibility. Okay, we ask all of our guests this question, Anders. If you have the freedom to visit anywhere in the world, where would you visit and why?
Ooh, okay. I bet you've already had people say this. I think I'd want to go to Machu Picchu down in South America. just
I haven't
amazing. I just love that idea of that ancient
Right.
world and that sort of thing, and just it looks so cool in books. So that's
That's a
mine.
good
So it's
one.
maybe a bit of a cop out, but that's definitely on my bucket list.
No. That's a real good one, actually. That's on my bucket list, too. I had opportunity about 3 years ago to go with a couple of friends that were doing it, and just my schedule just wouldn't work. I just couldn't make it happen. And that and the Galapagos Islands were the same situation. I couldn't, that was another trip that I was invited on. I couldn't go because I just couldn't get out of my other engagements. And
You were too engaged.
I was too engaged. Oh, how like you give somebody your word?
So you
Stick it.
can't be too engaged. There is such a thing, Anders. Although not when it comes to selling your products, right?
Exactly.
What's the best way for people to reach you?
Sure.
learn about
On our website is engagify.ai. So that's ENGAGIFY.ai. And then if you want to connect with me, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn, and it's Anders, Anders. I'm doing a lot of spelling here. Boulanger is Boulanger. Oh yeah, there we go. It looks like Boulanger. So if you're trying to spell that out. So yeah, reach out. I'd love to connect.
Well, thank you so much for coming on Be Bold Branding today. This has been an engaging conversation, and we appreciate it.
It has that.
I've learned a lot.
I'm quite fascinated with what you do, Anders.
All right, thanks for having me. It was a ball. It's a blast.
Brought to you by BrandFace, the only comprehensive personal brand building system across the globe.